thought I did. Let's see. Is it now? Okay, is it blinking like crazy and doing weird stuff? Okay, now it's locked in. I don't understand what goes on there sometimes, but okay. And let me make sure. Okay, and it looks like my audio is on this time. That's a great thing. Okay, so the ISO is International Standards Organization, and they've made a standard called the 9001 that helps organizations manage their quality. And I'm going to put myself on over in the Meet also. Okay. Sorry, I got a couple of things going on. So, Mark, I'll be with you in a bit, but I'm in a class right now. Sorry, guys. Okay. So, we're going to, this is really important that you are able to understand how the work you do and what the Design Hub documentation requirements are for. And the overall goal of the ISO 9001 is to ensure that an organization has planned to manage their quality. And that's really important, that they've got a plan for managing it. It doesn't just happen on accident. And whatever their quality is, they suggest that if you make junk, everything you make will be junk. And if you make something that's good, everything you make will be good. And there's all sorts of things in between. But we want you to know how the Design Hub plans, or if we have holes in our process, you help us plug them. So in section 8, that's the doing section. Okay? There's, I think, 12 sections, or 9 or 10 or 11. We're going to live in this section 8. And section 8.1 says, the organization shall plan, implement, and control processes. It's all about processes. Okay? Do you have a way that's identified that are needed to meet the requirements of the provision of products and services? What that means is that, hi Mark, what that means is that the client needs something and you've agreed to it somehow. How does that get done? How do you make sure that you're on the same page and it gets done right? And so last week we talked about one part of it. This week, another way that they say that you get this done is by establishing criteria for the acceptance of products and services. So, as an example, Leah is creating a product for us. All right? She's making a 3D asset that's going to go into a game, and that game is going to be a product. Mark, right now, is working on a service. It's a product, but it's really a service, right? It's a service that does something for our faculty in a certain way. And we might make the service into a product eventually, but it might just end up being a service. So programmers live in sort of an in-between world of products and services, and what you deliver might be a mix of both. Okay? And 3D asset modelers are mostly creating product. All right? So, these are the questions that you should ask if you, these are the questions that you should ask if you're going to make sure that our company, the Design Hub, our organization, has established some process for you to know this. Okay, so you're doing the work, so you got to know it somehow. So, do you know who set the criteria? Now, you might or you might not, but somebody is giving you your criteria that you're working to. And you need to at least know that, at the very least. The farther up the chain you go, the more you can be an independent worker because you'll know more about the criteria. So at the Design Hub, we try to get you right up as far as you can toward the main source. But the question will be, do you know who sets the criteria, at least for what you have to do? And if you do know who that is, do you know what the criteria? Do you know the criteria? Okay, so as an example, in Leia's case, she's making a TIG feed handle. Wire goes through it, and welders use it, and it does some stuff. But there are some criteria for it. The criteria was pretty simple. It was written down on a sheet, but it was things like, it's got to kind of look like you can find in a picture. We'd like some textures on it. It has to be scaled properly, and there has to be something that identifies the scale. So there were some criteria to it. And above all, it needs to be output in an OBJ or an STL file. Now, we might be changing that criteria soon, but that's what we've got. Now, here's the next thing. Do you know how that's measured? Like, Leia says, I'm done. Okay, well, Leia needs to know that when somebody looks at it, they're going to go, you're done, you're right, and it was a good job. We're going to measure it somehow. The ISO 9001 requires measurement. Okay, now the measurement might be show it to the client and get their reaction. Okay, and if they go blah and make choking sounds, you know that was probably not acceptable. As you measure their reaction, but it would be better if there were measurable results that we could go by, and that way we could even look at it before we've got it. Okay, so these are things that you should ask yourself that helps us understand if we are doing this or not as the Design Hub. If we are, good for us. You just need to follow our processes. Okay? If we're not, you need to bring it to the attention of your supervisor and the Design Hub leadership and go, I'm not getting this. I don't know what this is. And then we have to look at our own processes and see where they're falling apart. Because we might be going, well, what do you mean? Why didn't you look at the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da? And you go, well, I didn't know about it. Well, that's a failure of the training process. Okay? So it's all process-oriented, process-oriented, process-oriented. Okay? Now, one of the main things they tell us is that it doesn't have to be perfect. You need to be risk-based analysis in everything. Because we could make this so stringent that we would never get anything done. It's okay to accept failure if the risk of problems of that failure are small. Okay? So that's the standard right there. We need to be able to have processes that establish the criteria for acceptance. And these are ways to know if our processes are working. Okay, so last week what we did is we asked you if you knew the requirements of your project. Okay, now we're asking you, once you know the requirements, do you know what counts as a good job? So how do you guys think, what are some ways that you can think of that a company or a person or us as the Design Hub might let you know who's setting the criteria for a good job or a bad job? You guys got an idea on that? Where would you go to find it? It's tough, huh? It's like, uh-oh. Yep. Yep, that would be one of them. That's where you would go to know the criteria. But so, Andrew, one of the things that we said in our meeting on Monday is that one of our criteria is that our tutorials be like 2 to 3 minutes max, right? So, do you know who set that criteria? Yep. So there. And how did you know that I was the one that said it? Yeah, and I'm the guy that said it. We had a meeting. Okay? So that particular criteria, you can say, yeah, I know who said it. Randy did. And if you wanted to know, how did I know? Well, I heard it in a meeting. And you do know what the criteria is. And then, okay, how are we going to measure it? Well, we didn't really state it because it seems pretty obvious. We're going to look at the video and look and see how long it is, right? I mean, you can just look at it on YouTube and you click at the end and you know. So sometimes things are pretty, that's what they're saying. You don't have to, what would happen if somebody didn't know how to measure that? Nothing. It's like it's so obvious, right? But there are other criteria involved. Okay? So, and a lot of those criteria, I'll be honest, this is one of the places where the Design Hub actually lets you guys be pretty free, and we ask you to let us know what you think is a good job, and we ask you to tell us, what are you going to do? I'm going to do that, this, and we sort of go back and forth, and we go, yeah, we think that that'll be a good job. Okay? So this is one that's really hard for us to do. Okay? So let's look, though, and see. So that's one way, right? You can just have discussions and figure it out. What's a good job? What's a bad job? Mark, do you remember what when we talked, what was one of the criteria for your job for making the permission number checker? So not sure if he can hear us or see us right now. I was over in a different one with him. But Mark is programming a permission number distribution thing, right? And we said, well, it can be in Google Docs, or it can be this, or it can be this. But the main thing was it had to be one single program. It couldn't be, I couldn't have to go from here to here to here to here to here. It had to be an easy single phase workflow. Okay, so mostly the way the Design Hub gets this across is just through question and answer in a discussion. So if you were to audit us, what would you think then? If you were to come and check the Design Hub, and we said, well, we find those out during our weekly discussions, or when we talk about this project with our project leads. If somebody wanted to find out if our process was really followed, in other words, controlled, what would they do? How would they figure that out? For instance, if they came up to Tristan and said, "Okay, I understand that for Drop Bear Falls, you guys had some discussions, and you knew that it was a single person and a single asset, and da 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 da, and that there would be very few interactions. Show us. How would Tristan? What would you tend to think of that you could show them that we actually had those discussions?" Yep, yep. So for me, the first one, of course, would be look at a calendar and see if there were calendar items that mentioned that project. And then I would look to see who was there at those meetings and to see if a large portion or at least some of the people were at them, and then see if there were agendas or chat logs and things like that. And what an auditor would do is they would actually just pull a project at random and go, "Okay, show me this, show me this, show me this, show me this." And then if they go, "Wow, look, you guys had 8 chats and you did this, and looks like 7 out of 8 of you were in on those chats, and I see that you guys, one of the things that you talked about was this." So that's why we record these. That's why we like to have your names on the chat lines when you come into them. Hold on a sec. Okay, sorry about that. Are we still live? Yeah. And so they're going to need to be able to look these things up. So the next trick then is, so why do I do things all on the calendar then and in such great detail? Well, we can talk about these things, right? We can do these. We can get them down. And when I do a class or when I do a project meet, I will be using the Google Calendar in this way because we found out from Google Calendar that we can just rip all the data out, throw it into an Excel spreadsheet, upload it to a database, and have it be searchable. So it's very simple for us to be able to show that. So a lot of these things that we do here in the Design Hub, nobody's going to come and audit us. Nobody cares. But we want you to know how that's going to work. How that's going to work as we move you to a more professional setting. Okay, so that's one way, is you can do informal discussions. Okay, some projects have actual forms that call these things out. Some of them have intake meetings where you actually meet with people. Some have project management tracking lists that have places to record those. Okay, so those are all there. Now, if you look at one of our transmittals, you'll see that this is a way for us to close the loop. Okay, a lot of the information on here is about that. What part of the project is it? Do you know your client? Do you know what got done here? Do you know if there's still more work to do? Okay, so some of this, look at that. Is it validated for production? That means, has somebody checked it against the acceptance criteria? So some of this allows us to go and prove that we've actually closed the loop. So our system looks kind of weird and dumb and cumbersome, and why are we doing all this kind of stuff? But we're doing it so that, one, we know that we're following a process, we're meeting the ISO, and two, to train you so that when you do something, you can meet it. So when you go to your quality blog and it goes, huh, or something like that, and it goes, okay, did you follow the ISO? How did you know that you were doing a good job? You can say, well, this week I made sure that I was following 8.1 established criteria for acceptance. I made sure I knew what it was, and I wrote it down. And you can say in your productivity, that took me time and I did it. But that is productive. When you follow the standard and you do a process that is ensuring that you meet the standard, you are being productive. So I found out about that with the first place that I worked that did this. It's called Wemco Pumps. They were in Sacramento at the time. They'd been there for about 50 years, and we decided to get ourselves certified in ISO 9001. And we flunked within the first half hour of the first meeting when they came in to audit us, because we didn't really understand at the highest level that the reason to do this is to make our company better, not to get a piece of paper that we can say we're ISO 9001. And so what they suggested was that we make a flow chart and just follow a job through the shop. From the very beginning, the first contact with the sales guy to the last contact with the sales guy where he delivers the product. And we found that we had the stupidest, most inane processes, and that we had no way to ensure that this thing got done. We failed this one right off the bat. And it was why marketing and engineering always fought with each other after the product was shipped. Okay? So we decided that we would attack this one, and because this was a very expensive process, we would check and see whether it made our company better, i.e. made us more money, or made our customers happier. And we found that both happened when we attacked this one in particular. We went from $60,000 a quarter in rework due to customer complaint to $4,000 a quarter in customer complaint generated rework. And we went from an overall rating of, pardon my French, suckwad with our customers to up to pretty good. So this is a big deal right here. This is super, super, super important from my own experience. And there's lots of ways to do this. There's intake forms, there's checklists, there's drawings. I was telling Leah about inspection drawings that help you know the criteria, know how the criteria is measured. But try to be as clear as you can on those. And the most basic way is to give feedback on a regular basis to your supervisor or project lead. So as an example, today, Leah, where did you put those? Were those in the group chat where you put the drawings? There we go. If you guys want to just pop on the group text chat, you'll see that Leah just goes, she just asked. She flat out asked, what do you think of this? Does that look okay? All right. Well, there you go. She didn't actually know the criteria all the way, So she was going, I don't know, so I'm just going to ask. That is, in the most basic way, how you would go about establishing this criteria for acceptance, but that requires constant communication, which means that your supervisors must have constant access to your work, either through something like Discord or a file sharing system or something like that. And that's perfectly within the standards limits, all the way up to some checkbox that says you know how to do it. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. You go to this process checklist. Here it is right here. And each time you do a job, okay, now look, I'm gonna address Leah specifically on this one, but Andrew, this applies to you too, and Mark, as you get going on your real project, which, by the way, has TAC talked to you yet, Mark, about the AR project yet? Okay, cool. I think it sounds pretty cool and pretty doable. But so Leah, you're making assets for the weld shop. You don't need to do one of these each time you do a new asset for the weld shop, especially if you're doing kind of the same thing. But if all of a sudden now we ask you to, I don't know, make something else, make a wing that we're going to put into a simulator for another department, then you would do a new one of these. All right, so it's sort of up to you about how granular you want to get, and you might want to practice this 3 or 4 times to get good at it at a granular level. It's going to be sort of up to you, okay? But last week we went over, do you know these people? Do you know? Who is the client? Check, 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 check. And then here's the big question. Write down, how do you know? I had a meeting. It was written to me in a spreadsheet. I got it on Discord. And then, do you have evidence? Mostly that's going to be links to things. Or you can say, look at the calendar or whatever. So that's what we did last week. This week, I've added a new part. And I've directly related it to this. So, here they are. Who establishes the criteria? And now I'm going to go ahead and resolve this. I thought I could resolve it. There it goes. Thank you. So now you're going to continue with the one that you started, cut and paste this into it, and start asking yourselves the question, who established the criteria for accepting your work? And if you don't know, you have to find out who assigned your work to you and ask the question. And you can do that through an email, through Discord, through some other communication that you've got. Okay? Do you know the criteria for accepting your work? Now, Leah, we just sort of changed your criteria through a conversation. Okay? And so but you still know what that criteria is. For example, what we did is we changed it from it has to have a 1 meter cube in it to, oh, we want some sort of a document that allows us to understand the scale of your model. And that could be an engineering document. It could be a drawing that you went into and just drew in Google Sheets and drew a line, whatever. And how do you know? We discussed it during a Discord meet. And do you have evidence? You can either put the name of the of the channel and the date or something like that. And how are you going to measure your work? We're not really telling you that much right now because we're just starting out. But as you go into your meetings, you should be asking that question as the designer, as the programmer, as the asset developer. You should be going, all right, you got to tell me, how do I know I'm giving you what you want? Okay, how am I going to measure that? Or how are you going to measure that? Okay, that's a key critical part that most companies leave out, and we don't have a good way solid right now. And so we're actually going to be looking at your answers here on how do you know, and we're going to be sort of making our system better as we go. Okay? Does not have to be restrictive. This should not be something that makes your work harder. It should be something that makes your work easier, better, more correct the first time. Okay? Easy ways are checklists, forms. Yeah. So your SolidWorks is a little different. Yep. So I got it. Yeah. We'll play around with that a little bit more. The 1 meter cube idea can still work too. A real good way to measure work is to have a regular, they call it coordination meeting. So as an example, in architecture, every week the electrician meets with the plumber, meets with the HVAC person, meets with the phone and data person, meets with the energy person, meets with the interior designer. They have this team, and they have a coordination meeting, and they just ask each other, anybody got a problem we got to go through? And they start showing each other their work. Because sometimes this gets so complicated that it's hard. But you might have what they call just a coordination meeting on a regular basis. So Andrew, that's what we do in the videos. We just have a coordination meeting. And we'll let you know right then and there. And sometimes we even change how we measure the work. So that's a good way to do it. Coordination meetings, checklists, representative samples. That's one of the biggest ways to do it. So here's an example. When I was engineering manager at Ames Valves, we had some fairly complex little assemblies that we would make. It was called a bypass valve. And it had like 8 parts. And those had to screw together and then mount onto another valve. And depending on how closely the other valve was made, it got really hard. We could get leaks. We could get all these types of things. And so it was hard to make a drawing. Sometimes there were spacers. Sometimes you'd use this pipe. Sometimes you'd use that pipe. But our assemblers were really good. They really knew what was going on. And they hardly ever made a mistake. So we asked them, how come you're so good at it? And the guy had been doing it forever. He came up and he said, see that one over there? Yeah. He goes, that was the 3rd one I ever built. And they liked it. So I kept it. And I just always make it like that. And everybody here makes it like that. And I go, oh, cool. That's called a representative sample. So that's how they knew how if their work was right. They just looked at it. They checked it against something that they knew was already okay. That's one of the most powerful ways of understanding the acceptance criteria and how to measure your work. Representative samples or a comparison. Okay, so I'll go back to Leia's example again, where Leia, did you even know what this thing was? I just kind of said, make this thing. Did you know what one was or what it did? Right. You know a little bit more now, though, right? Right. Yeah. So we just Googled, a reference object after the fact using another program may lead to mismeasurement. It can after the fact. If you do it ahead of time. And now here's another thing. Representative samples don't work very well in programming other than as a style sheet. Okay, so in programming, do they have style sheets? Do you guys know? Do they have something called that would be similar to a style sheet? So in graphics, Andrew knows about these. In graphics, they go, okay, I want a graphic that looks like this, but here's a style sheet, and it tells you what fonts they're allowed to use and what size and what colors and how they need to be arranged. Okay, yeah. Okay. It's probably more, yeah, and it's probably more likely used on the user interface side where you're trying to go, okay, very nice code, but now somebody has to use it, right? So this part, I mean, I'll tell you, what you write down here is so dependent on what industry you're in, what your project is, the scale of your project, what's the risk if you get it wrong? Look, in the Design Hub, what's the risk if we got it wrong? Nothing. All we're doing is working to make something that exists a little bit better. Okay? So we don't have a risk. And so we'll put maybe a more flexible, loosey-goosey format together for some of these. Because if it went wrong, you just learned something and we've got it. The other thing is sometimes your project leader isn't the content expert, and we just don't even have one. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I'm sharing over here too. Did that mess up the share at all? I think it's still okay. So these are all kind of things that we can look at and see and do. So that's sort of a discussion about that. But if you can ask these questions of yourself and you can answer them, then you sort of know what's going on. And if you can have evidence, it helps us understand whether our process is controlled or not. Because the standard says the organization, that's the Design Hub, shall plan, implement, and control processes needed to do this. Okay? And I'm not sure we do this really well. This is one of our weaker areas, and by doing this, you'll help us get stronger. Okay, any questions on all that? Okay, let's go over just really quickly what's going to be due on Friday. at the end of the day, your time card, your file transmittals, and your productivity reflection. Does anybody need me to go over those real quick? You find those. Where do you find those? Find those right here. Time card. No, that's not where you find them. That's where you put them. You put them in your time card, deliverable, productivity report. And how you do them is up on the top one. Productivity report is the hardest one. Okay? Maybe the transmittals. But I want to see a transmittal from everybody this week, even if it's a work in process. But those of you who are given those short startup ones, I'm really hoping that you'll be finished with your startup ones now by the end of the week. So you're going to have your productivity due on the 4th, on the 4th, on the 4th. Okay? And then let's go back and see what's due after that. Why is that one on the 6th? Productivity submittal. I don't know why that one is on there. Should not be there. Oh, I think I moved it. I'm going to take, ooh, that's interesting. Okay, I've got a problem there that I have to go through. And then your quality submittal, quality reflection, and quality blog is due also on the 6th. I don't know why that's due there. These should all be due on the Friday. Okay, so let's go back and look at that. Modules, quality, on the 6th. Submit your quality blog as a PDF, and in the text box, this is the important part. This relates to what we just talked about. Write a clear and concise reflection on quality that demonstrates that you know how your work helped meet the standard. Okay? So you want to sort of reflect on what we've talked about so far. Do you know the requirements? And then do you know the criteria and how to measure it? And if you do, you can say that your work is helping us meet the standards by getting the job done on time because we don't have to rework product, or getting the correct job to the client because we don't have to go back and do it again because we did the wrong stuff. Okay? So you'll just want to write something out in the text. Cool? Okay. That's it. You guys good? Cool. Okay, I'm going to turn off the record now.